Hi, glad to see you on my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. Have a good view. The mobilization began and the first exchange of blows. On the morning of July 29, 1914, following orders from First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill, the Royal Navy's main force, the famed Grand Fleet, began the move from Portland to its new operating base of Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands. This first move by the British outlined their strategy for the future war, a long-range blockade of Germany. The huge fleet arrived at the convenient but poorly equipped base on August 2nd, when Britain's entry into the war was still in doubt. But on August 4th, after the Germans invaded Belgium, whose neutrality was guaranteed by Great Britain, the battle between the two strongest fleets in Europe became inevitable. The Germans immediately decided to demonstrate in what style they were going to fight. At 19:30 on August 4th, 3.5 hours before the expiration of the British ultimatum to Berlin, from the mouth of the Ems came a small, 2,160 tons passenger steamer, Königin Louise, hastily converted into an auxiliary minesweeper. The ship did not even begin to install all the necessary artillery. After loading 200 mines to the commander of the minesweeper, Corvette Captain Karl Biermann, was ordered to immediately go to sea and set mines on the eastern approach to the mouth of the Thames. According to British researchers, the Germans, who were unable to uncover the already occurred redeployment of the Grand Fleet, hoped this barrage to inflict losses to warships making the passage from the English Channel to the North Sea. However, Biermann's mission was interfered with by the ubiquitous British fishermen. On the morning of August 5th, the skipper of the Lowestoft-based wooden sailing trawler Little Boys, Charles Wright, spotted through binoculars a suspicious vessel dumping objects in the water 30 miles east of Orfordness, and reported it to a group of warships led by the cruiser Amphion. At 11:15 GMT, British destroyers caught up with the barrage, which managed to radio that it had laid all the mines, after which it was sunk. However, in the early hours of the next morning, the Amphion, returning to base, hit its victims' mines and became the first Royal Navy ship to be sunk in the new war, killing most of the Germans rescued from the Königin Louise. The 200 mines laid by the Germans were considered by the British to be a very large number, and they called this barrage South Field. Mobilization of British trawlers began with the battle fleet on July 29th and generally went according to plan, although it was obvious that the first of them will be ready for trawling only by the end of the first decade of August. Therefore, the fleet's training trawlers, purchased before the war, which had previously been engaged in towing targets, were sent to trawl the field exposed by the Königin Louise. With orders to get trawls at Nore, the trawl flotilla put to sea on August 6th to neutralize the south field stretching from Orfordness to Southwold. As is usually the case, it was only with the actual announcement of mobilization that all the pre-war deficiencies in planning and calculation of requirements began to show themselves. Of the 145 trawlers earmarked for mobilization, 92 were in ports, and the process of transferring them to the fleet had begun. The missing number was replaced and arranged in coordination with the Admiralty, which, however, after the installation of the minefield Königin Louise, immediately requested the government to requisition an additional 100 trawlers. But first, it was necessary to deal with the disorganization of the fishing industry that had begun. Despite the fact that the messenger from the Admiralty, conveying the order of the fleet on the end of fishing due to the outbreak of hostilities, arrived at the British Board of Fisheries and Agriculture at 20 Cower on August 4th, it was almost impossible to implement in reality. The fishing boats at sea had no radios, so it was extremely difficult to get them back to ports quickly, although the companies had committed to sending special vessels to alert the fishermen. No one yet knew what would be the nature of the new war and its duration. At Aberdeen, on August 5th, the flags of 2 German trawlers were lowered in large crowds. Their crews complied with this request with great reluctance, although they treated the Germans so far quite decently. The British authorities announced the immediate registration of all persons liable for military duty of enemy states, but some German fishermen continued to go to sea on British ships until the end of 1914, until a court sentence did not pay for it hard labor. The same excesses were noted in German harbors, as later recounted by those who returned from captivity. About 50,000 barrels of herring were piled up in English harbors on August 5th for delivery to Russia and Germany. These two countries accounted for 85% of British herring exports, some 600,000 tons annually, with the fish transiting to Russia through German ports. In panic, not yet realizing what was happening, the herring kings tried to sell their goods quickly and cheaply to Scandinavia and the USA, not realizing that in a month the season would be completely disrupted. Only a small amount of herring was sent to Arkhangelsk. After the initial docking of trawlers and the drafting of conscripted fishermen, the government, reassured by the passivity of the Germans, again allowed fishing in certain areas of the North Sea, but it soon became clear that this optimism was premature. Incident with the König and Louise confirmed the British in the opinion that the Germans intend to conduct off the east coast of Britain intensive mine warfare. Being in line, minesweepers of the Royal Navy divided. Half of the trawling south field, the rest went to the northeast of Scotland, where the main forces of the fleet were based, and mine defense is still completely absent. Of course, the enemy existed, and all this traffic had to be organized and secured. Already on August 8th, 3 days after the outbreak of war, was ready to plan the East Coast Military Channel, a narrow, only 4 cables wide, a safe lane along the coast, marked by buoys and milestones, regularly trawled and covered by patrol ships. Although at first it was optimistically thought that 80 mobilized trawlers would be sufficient for this purpose, it quickly became clear that the entire pre-war reserve would have to be used and additional forces mobilized. The port of Lowestoft became the main base for the deployment of the trawler force. From the beginning of mobilization, all factory and repair capacities of this base worked at the limit. By August 8th, the 114 ships were put into service. 2 weeks later, this number increased by another 100 units. The flywheel of permanent mobilization began to turn. On August 11th, 50 more steam drifters without armament were ordered to be requisitioned for patrolling the future military canal. The nation of enlightened mariners knew how to work quickly, and by the end of August, the military canal should have been operational. But the enemy also showed that he had no intention of giving up the initiative. The enemy appears from behind the horizon. The Germans continued to intensify their reconnaissance in order to locate the main forces of the Royal Navy. According to British historian Julian Corbett, in the early days of the war, the Germans relied heavily on their own fishing boats with carrier pigeons on board. But British patrols quickly swept the foreign fishermen out of their operating area, destroying intercepted vessels. Now, the Germans decided to deliberately capture the English fishermen to get the information they needed. On the night of August 22nd, small cruisers, Rostock and Strasbourg, together with 6 flotilla of destroyers, undertook a search in the North Sea. By this time, the British High Command, calmed by the absence of active hostilities, allowed with some restrictions to conduct fishing, and the Germans simply could not help but meet such a desirable and defenseless prey. In 180 miles west of Helgoland, they discovered and sunk 8 trawlers with explosive charges. All the fishermen, 73 in number, were taken prisoners. This was the first major blow to the British fishermen. Before that, their losses from the fighting were limited to the Grimsby trawler Tubal Cain, 227 bt, sunk on August 7, 1914 by the German auxiliary cruiser Kaiser Wilhelm der Grosse in the Atlantic. That the loss of 8 trawlers was only the beginning of the end of British fishing in the North Sea showed the events of the next few days. On the night of August 25th, from Helgoland came out of the German detachment consisting of a minesweeper, Albatross, small cruiser, Stuttgart, and 3 destroyers. The task of Albatross was to block the mouth of the Tyne with mines. Around 15 wire on August 25th, when the ships were in the fishing ground's northwest corner of the Dogger Bank, the Germans began to get the British trawlers, which awaited the lightning reprisal. Before 19 size destroyers captured and sunk 9 trawlers, whose crews transferred to the Albatross and Stuttgart. With prisoners on board, Minesag around midnight began mine-laying 200 mines 30 miles from the coast opposite the mouth of the Tyne. On the way back in the afternoon, the squadron destroyed another trawler and returned to Helgoland on the night of August 26th. Almost simultaneously conducted the same operation to block the mouth of the Humber, a detachment consisting of the barrier Nautilus, cruiser Mainz, and a flotilla of destroyers went in the early morning of August 25th from Emden. As on the first occasion, the Germans were not detected because they again laid mines 30 miles from the mouth of the Humber, while the British sentries kept concentrated near the ports and bases. On the return trip, 6 more trawlers from Boston fell victim to the raid. Thus, the first result of the Germans' mine activity was the destruction of 16 trawlers within 2 days and the capture of 139 fishermen. About a year and a half later, most of them were released as part of a prisoner exchange program between the belligerents, and some of the fishermen gave details of their captivity and the Germans' treatment of them. The skipper of the trawler Lobelia, Robert Kemp, recalled that the destroyer, fast and nimble as an eel, flew up to the trawler in an instant and, demonstrating the excellent training of the crew, moored to the bow of the Lobelia. Holding the fishermen at gunpoint, the Germans ordered the fishermen to leave the ship immediately, without allowing them to take their personal belongings and clothing. Only the skipper was required to take the ship's papers. After taking the British on board, German sailors laid explosive charges in the engine room, returned to the destroyer, and a few minutes later, Lobelia exploded in front of the captives. Similarly, the destroyer massacred 3 more trawlers, and on his deck piled up about 40 British prisoners. They were on the enemy's board for about 6 hours, until 21, after which, owing to the apparent lack of facilities, they were transferred to the Albatross. The crew of the destroyer treated the fishermen quite normally. They were given water and fed, allowed to communicate among themselves. Kemp remembered that many Germans spoke excellent English, including an arrogant commander aged 35 years old, who, after questions about the location of warships of the Royal Navy, to which he received no answer, began to talk about politics. Not understanding why England got involved in the war, he summarized unhesitatingly, "You do not have people, and we have enough people and food." On board the Albatross, according to Kemp, the conditions were much stricter, although the Germans on a spree and informed the prisoners where the ship is and how it performs the task. The British were more frightened by the prospect of being killed by mines or fire from their ships. Arthur Higgins, a fisherman, testified that the commander of the Albatross treated them with ill-concealed disgust, saying that the British trawlers were secretly laying mines and guiding submarines. Although the fishermen denied it, some members of the barrage crew addressed them as English pigs. The other sailors generally corroborated these accounts, although it was clear from their testimony that the circumstances of the capture and sinking depended largely on the character of the destroyer's commander. Some crews were given a few minutes to gather, allowed to take clothes and personal belongings. From one trawler, the Germans took a few baskets of fresh fish. Sometimes, instead of blowing up the ship, they preferred to do with a couple of accurate shots from the gun. On August 27th, the Germans led the captured Englishmen through the streets of Wilhelmshaven, where they were attacked by the civilian population, after which the fishermen waited for the road to the POW camps. Surprisingly, during this period of the war, the fishermen of both opposing sides became the object of hatred and suspicion. There were also allegations in the English press and Parliament that German neutral-flag trawlers were spying and laying mines in English waters. As the already mentioned Edward Chatterton wrote, among the sailors of minesweepers and patrol ships, this propaganda campaign caused nothing but contempt for the mental abilities of some politicians. They clearly had no idea how many mines an ordinary trawler or drifter could take on board, and how far it had to travel from the nearest German harbor. The writer, however, did not mention that this version was voiced to politicians and journalists by professionals from the Admiralty, and speculation continued until the Germans themselves announced that their warships had set up barrages. The German barrages were discovered just in time. 2 British battlecruisers had already received orders to leave Humber for Helgoland, where the Royal Navy would inflict a painful defeat on the Germans in their home waters on August 28th. Already at about 2200 hours on August 26th, the fishermen of the steam drifter city of Belfast were astonished to find 2 German mines laid in their nets off Humber. Having successfully disposed of the dreaded catch, they continued fishing until the following morning, when a mine exploded in the trawl, whereupon the drifter hurried to shore with a report of the threat. The line cruisers held south of the dangerous area, and they returned from the battle already at Firth of Forth, while the boundaries of the barrage were being established. Behind the thunder of big calibers and victory speeches lurked unpleasant news for the British fishing industry. The presence of mines and mass seizures of fishermen meant that the North Sea will have to leave. At the same time, it was time for the Trawler Reserve to show that in addition to cod and herring, it could also hunt for horned death. Alas, the reality turned out to be far from the pre-war exercises. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to me. See you soon.